Good day and welcome to Letters and Politics. I'm Mitch. Today we're going to be in conversation about the history of Red Scares, when the fear of communism was used as a pretext to allow the government to suppress the left. First, just after World War I, against intellectual anarchists like Emma Goldman and others, and the second in the middle of the 20th century during the height of the Cold War, when another Red Scare was used to purge the labor movement of communist and socialist. It could be argued we are now facing a third Red Scare in which the apparatus of government is being deployed to suppress the left, not this time in labor, but in universities and the legal field. We come to you as my home station, KPFA in Berkeley, which gave birth to the Pacifica Radio Network in 1949, celebrates its 76th birthday. KPFA has also been a target of the Red Scare over the years. In 1960, KPFA broadcaster William Mandel was summoned to testify at the House of Un-American Activities Committee at a hearing that was held in San Francisco City Hall. It led to this famous encounter.
Are you now, or have you ever been, a member of the Communist Party?
Sir, I am 42 years of age and have never had to face a jury as defendant or grand jury as witness in my life. I have committed no crime under any of the laws of this country and am not engaged in subversion. I certainly shall not answer questions representing allegations against me made by persons not present and not identified, whom I cannot confront and whom my lawyer cannot cross-examine as to their truthfulness.
Do you honestly apprehend, sir, that if you told this committee truthfully while you're under oath whether or not you are now this instant or ever have been a member of the Communist Party, you would be supplying information which might be used against you in a criminal proceeding?
Honorable beaters of children and sadists uniformed and in plain clothes, distinguished Dixiecrat wearing the clothing of a gentleman, eminent Republican who opposes an accommodation with the one country with which we must live at peace in order for us all and our children to survive. Do you think that I am going to cooperate with this collection of Judases, of men who sit there in violation of the United States Constitution? If you think I will cooperate with you in any way, you are insane.
Former KPFA broadcaster William Mandel testifying at the HUAC committee that was being held in San Francisco in 1960 as part of what's commonly known as the Second Red Scare. Today we're going to be in conversation about Red Scares, both then and now. My guest for this is a good friend to this radio network and also longtime broadcaster himself, Richard Wolff. Richard Wolff is a professor of economics, and he hosts the program Economic Update. Professor Wolff, always great to see you, sir. Thank you for being here today.
My pleasure, Mitch, and it's a topic I know more about than I wished I did, and I'm glad to talk about it with you.
And you are a Marxist economist, so that's important towards this conversation. William Mandel, that we just heard there, did a show on KPFA in which he actually read the Soviet press to people here in the United States, and that was one of the reasons I imagine why he was forced to go testify. Were you familiar with William Mandel?
I knew about him. I had heard him on a couple of occasions. Yeah, he was one of those people when I was, a teenager, when I was young, and I became interested in politics. I very quickly understood. I should preface it by saying I was born in Ohio. I've lived and worked in the United States all my life. I quickly learned as a high schooler that if I asked questions about socialism, communism, Marxism, anarchism, Soviet Union, and a whole host of those kind of subjects, the look on my teacher's face was unbelievable. It was a mixture of fear and anguish, and and some of them were bad teachers, and that was the end of it. Others were very good teachers, and teachers I really loved and who taught me a lot, and I could see the pain in their face. And after a while, I went to the one I knew and liked best, and I said I said in his face, "You look so upset. Do you want me to stop asking questions?" It was kind of not genuine on my part. I knew he didn't. He believed in, he encouraged the students. That was why he was a good teacher, to ask a lot of questions. So I knew it kind of put him up against it. And he said, no, it has nothing to do with that. You should ask questions, but it is Then he looked at me the way an older teacher would look at a young kid and said, he slowed down the cadence of his speech. It is dangerous for me to talk to you about it in the class. I looked at him. I said, why? Because it was naive. I didn't understand really what he was talking about. And he said, well, I know about you and I know about your parents, which he did. Uh, and he said, it's not a problem with you. He said, but I can't control what the other young people in the classroom, how they're going to understand my answer, how they're going to repeat it to their parents who are not like your parents when they get home and ask your classmates, how did school go today? And it's too dangerous. And then he explained to me that, I love being a teacher, which we all knew because he was our favorite, not just mine, everybody's. You could see he was wrestling with something that seriously endangered what he had chosen to do with his life. And since I loved the guy, I immediately stopped asking those kinds of questions. And by the way,
You policed yourself. You policed yourself.
yes, absolutely. And the other people in the class who I knew shared my interest because we chatted in the schoolyard. We were personal friends. They understood. I told them about my I didn't go into details, but I told them about my meeting, and they could see his face as well. And nobody wanted to hurt this guy at all. So yeah, the classroom stopped learning these things, which, by the way, not good for me, not good for the students, not good for the teacher, and if I dare say so, not good for the country, unless you're the kind of person who believes in silencing young people when they ask perfectly reasonable questions.
When I think of the history of Red Scares, I think of the first one just after World War II. This is in response, in part at least, to the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Anarchists and communists and those on the left, radical leftists here in the country, were targeted for deportation. Emma Goldman was deported out of the country, the great anarchist thinker. Then I think again, sort of after World War II, maybe the second Red Scare. This is when the United States is now in competition with the Soviet Union for global hegemony. And this is a time in which people are, I think, I see it sort of being purged from the labor movement, socialists and communists. I think about the dock workers strike in the 1930s in San Francisco. Again, deportations then were being used as well. They tried to deport unsuccessfully, but they tried to deport labor leader Harry Bridges, I think in around 1934 or so. And I don't mean to be hyperbolic, but I've been spending a lot of time on the history of Red Scares because it feels like we're in a moment of a Red Scare now in which it's universities that are being targeted. And you can make an argument where labor in the 1930s and 1940s was sort of an where you found the institutional left. I think you can make an argument that it's universities today that you could find the institutional left. I don't mean the street left. I don't mean the socialist worker paper. I mean sort of institutionalized left. I think you will find it in universities, which again, I feel is under attack. How do you respond to what I just laid out there?
No, I agree. I think the remarkable thing is that the attack on the Communist Party and the attack on leftists in general. Well, let me get at it this way. When I first started teaching, I realized that the ignorance that I had had as a teenager, I had overcome by basically finding the few academic professors who would talk to me, who would give me things to read. Then I found other students, and there is a community that you can find in many universities of people who are more open-minded, not narrow-minded, and all of that. And I found them too, and I learned it. I learned the material. I read the books. They're in the libraries. It's not hard. Uh, and then when I began to teach, my first real teaching happened at Yale University, where I got my PhD. And as part of the PhD program at Yale University, you do teaching. You teach undergraduates in classes. And I found, to my amazement, that my students, and let's remember, Yale students, they're fairly selective. They have to do reasonably well in high school to get into Yale. You also have to have money, which is even more important, particularly at Yale. But in any case, they didn't understand the difference. For my students at Yale, used the word Marxist, socialist, communist, anarchist, terrorist as synonyms. In other words, and it wasn't their fault. No one had ever taught them what the enormous differences among these groups was, and is. They're different views, they're different goals, they're different strategies. I mean, and I realized that's one of the results of what had happened to me in high school, that this is a country that is so, I don't know what polite word to use, so dogmatically driven that when it has a political opposition, it needs to demonize the other. It needs to exaggerate beyond all words. When I became a professor of economics and my students would ask me about Marxist views, or ask me about the Soviet Union or about China or Cuba or any of those things, I realized when I was talking with my colleagues, they knew nothing about it. These were very nice people. These were very serious professors. They were, erudite. I have nothing but good words for them. But when it came to this material, it was unbelievable. It was a blank slate. They had been so traumatized, and I use that word advisedly, by the Cold War and all that it meant, that they backed away, like good Christian wood from the devil, and they waved their garlic or whatever it is that made the devil disappear. They wanted nothing to do with it. They didn't look at a book by Marx or Lenin or any of those people. They didn't read the literature. They cultivated a safety distance from it, and consequently knew nothing. Or even sometimes worse, they had gotten some dismissive remark from a professor who had the same view, and they copied and repeated all of that. But there was no, I know this is amazing to say, maybe nowadays, I couldn't find among my professors, and I'll mention here because it'll come back later. I was a student at Harvard. That's where I did my undergraduate work. I could not find a professor, and I looked at Harvard in the social sciences, who could teach me a course that I wanted to learn about Marxism and socialism. Not one. And I think the answer is the overwhelming majority of people in the social sciences, who were otherwise good, bad, and in between teachers, no better, no worse than anywhere else, that most of them didn't know. They didn't teach it because they didn't know it. But there were some who knew it, and like my high school teacher, felt it was far too dangerous to be rumored among the students to be the one you go to if you want to learn that. They didn't want that. They did not want to take that risk. And so we were all deprived unless we found that learning on our own.
I feel like when you're talking about, again, kind of getting back to this self-policing aspect to it, this is what happens when suppression is normalized.
Yep.
Well, once it's normal, people know in order to get by, you have to police yourself.
But Mitch, here's an irony that has always engaged my brain. And I'm going to say it bluntly to get the idea across without taking too much time. I think that the whole anti-communist, anti-socialist, anti-left was a ruse, was an excuse. Here's what I mean. These were right-wing, Southern, often folks. They wanted the good old days, what would now be called MAGA. They wanted to go back to a time when the local business community ran every village and town. They were the fathers, very few women among them, of course, no non-white people among them. You know, the Rotarians was the only collective activity that you had. They wanted that. They didn't want immigrants. They didn't want all these different kinds of people. They didn't want big cities. They were frightened by all of it, taking away the America in which they dominated. And they needed to, after the Great Depression, they were really hurt because in the Great Depression, they went from being the people who ran the community, the distinguished gentlemen. They went and they became the villains. They became the guy who drove you out of your job, the guy who foreclosed on your house, all the rest of it. And we had the great, the New Deal. We had all these movements of masses of particularly industrial factory workers, intellectuals, urban dwellers around Roosevelt, bringing in Social Security and unemployment, government jobs. They didn't want any of that. And after the war, they wanted to undo it. And remember, Roosevelt paid for Social Security, unemployment compensation. He paid by taxing corporations and the rich. It was the worst horror that the business mentality could ever have imagined. So after the war, they needed a way to undo the New Deal. With Roosevelt's death in 1945, they had to undo all that had been achieved by the left in America from 1929 to 1945, which is a long time. And they needed a crusade to drive out. And here's how they did it. They looked at what are the two things we hate most about the Roosevelt period. Number one, the rise of the left. The fact that socialist and communist parties became important here in America.
Played a role. They played a role in that period of time.
Very big. They were part of what was called the New Deal coalition. Two socialist parties, a communist party, the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, brought together tens of millions of people, was the greatest labor organizing drive in American history. We never had anything like it before. We've never had anything like it since. So they were a very powerful force. And the business community, right after the war, how do we undo? They were smart. They knew it wasn't Roosevelt. It was that pressure from below that Roosevelt accommodated as a politician. So what did they do? What's the worst thing? The worst thing is we were made to pay for a mass program that was costly. And number two, that during World War II, the United States was allied with the devil, namely the Soviet Union, who was our ally against Nazism and fascism in Europe and Japan. And the way to do that, the way to kill those two birds with one stone, was anti-communism. It allowed you to turn Russia from an ally into the evil empire out there, at the same time that you got rid of their fifth column, the communists here amongst us, hiding under our beds and in our schoolrooms and all the rest. And it was a wonderful story to tell. If you listen to the hearings, as I have done, before the House Un-American Activities Committee that you mentioned, where Mandel was speaking, If you hear them speak, you hear from them what you hear from Mr. Trump. They, like so many of my colleagues, have no clue what Marxism and socialism is. Mr. Trump refers to the Marxist fascists as if the two words have no problem being connected one to the other. He refers to the universities as full of Marxists, which they're not. They haven't been. I've spent my whole life in there. I've been looking for them. They're not there. I wish there were many of them, but there aren't, and there haven't been, and they threaten absolutely nobody, as anyone who isn't ideologically driven would tell you. It's an excuse. And let me drive the point home one further moment. Just like today, the immigrant is an excuse. Problems in America are not caused by immigrants. Problems in America will not be solved by deporting him. This is a kind of scapegoating. It releases pressure. It allows people to be angry at somebody. The problems of the American people are real. The suffering of the working class is real. They have every right to be upset, angry, bitter, and want change. But to allowing themselves to be turned against these among the poorest people on earth, crawling their way up from Central America to get into the country and thinking this is our problem, this is where we're going to put our priority, it's an excuse. And people should see through it time after time as demagogues try to make money off of people's genuine suffering by leading the purge, now of the labor movement, then of the artists, now of the university people. I mean, it's childish, but it has long-term devastating effects.
So this idea that we have a history of using anti-communism as a pretext to go after, I guess, the gains of the New Deal. If you look at the second Red Scare,
Yep.
And if we keep that in mind to today, it said, especially what's happening with the universities, and I think legal firms too, especially trying to force legal firms who traditionally backed quote unquote Democratic kind of party issues now are putting billions of dollars towards backing Donald Trump and basically being forced to do it through the apparatus of the government, the force of the government. But let's maybe stick with universities. There, it's saying we're going after woke ideology.
Yeah.
We're going after transgenderism. We're going after critical race theory. And all of these have been under the umbrella. I've been watching conservative media long enough to know this was all under the umbrella of what they used to call cultural Marxism.
Right.
So there's the Marx connection again to all of this.
Right.
But when you talk about, again, woke ideology, critical race theory, issues around transgenderism, it sounds like a cultural war, not an economic war. Are you saying there's also an economic component to what's happening here?
Absolutely. I think the economic is the root of most of this. Here's what I mean. There are two or three crucial problems facing this country right now that are real. And I've mentioned them in my discussions with you, on other programs that you've run. I think the American people are very, very upset that the empire that the United States presided over, coming out of World War II, again, we're right back to 1945, every other pretender, every other company that might have wanted to be the empire of the world, the British, which had just finished losing its empire, or the French or the German or the Japanese, they were all destroyed in the war. The United States emerged, unlike all of the others, economically stronger at the end of the war than they had been going in. Going in was the Great Depression. Coming out, everybody had been put to work, half of them in the military, the other half making what the military needs to be a military. So we came out of the war strong. Everybody else was weak. the British pound sterling stopped being the international currency, and the US dollar replaced it. And we have been for the last 70 years until 2010, 2015, we were the top of the world. We're the only country that has, hundreds of military bases around the world. Our currency is used everywhere. We were the military power, the ideological power. Everybody learns to wear blue jeans. I mean, we are it. And to just in the interest of time, that's over. We lost the war in Vietnam. We lost it in Afghanistan. We lost it in Iraq. We're losing it in Ukraine. I mean, the messages are written on the wall, and everybody, even those who protest against what I just said, they know it. The level of debt in our country, the government is in greater debt than it has ever been. The corporate sector is in greater debt than it has ever been. Private homes and individuals are in greater debt than it has ever been. When I went to school, nobody had loads of debt to go to college. But the next generation after me started loading up, and there's no end in sight. That's not a healthy economy where everything is done on credit, where you don't earn enough to do anything. You have to borrow your way crazy to try to get as close to the American dream, which keeps being pushed further away from you. Americans are upset about that. They were taught to believe that they were the inheritors of the American dream, that if you go to school and you work hard, you will get all the things that are somehow there waiting for you. And this generation has learned, just as their parents have, that that's not true anymore, and they're upset. Of course they're upset. But the business community now has a problem. It's solving the problem by saying to the American worker, you don't count. We're leaving. American corporations left over the last 40 years. Almost every one of the big corporations moved their activities out of the country. Who said to them, you're not patriotic? Nobody. But that's what they did. You lost your job. Look at cities like Detroit or Cleveland or Wilmington, Delaware, or many, St. Louis. Large parts of these cities are unlivable because it's collapsed. And there's no end in sight to all of this. There's a reason the last 8 presidents have all promised to bring manufacturing back to America. Everyone promised it. Not a single one of them delivered it. Mr. Trump is promising it. And I'll tell you a secret that is no secret. He won't do it either. It's not going to happen. Why? Because American wages are still higher, not as much as they once were, but they're higher than the wages anywhere else. And the markets elsewhere are growing faster. So hence my point. The American business community is in trouble. It doesn't know what quite to do. Look at the extraordinary action of Mr. Trump. He just did a real damaging hurt to every country on earth with these tariffs. Who does such a thing? We make fun and we demonize Mr. Putin. He didn't do it. We demonize Xi Jinping in China. He didn't do it. One leader in the world has the boldness of saying, I'm going to hit you with a tariff. It's going to hurt you. Now, you can get it relieved, but you got to give me some. Holy mackerel. We're making enemies on a scale. Why is this? Because the United States' economic system is in trouble. And we're a country whose practice is called denial. We don't talk about that except obliquely. And we certainly don't link it to our political and ideological problems. The Republican Party represents the business community of this country more than it represents anything else. It is desperate. Look at it. For 100 years, the Republican Party was the party of no taxes or low taxes or cut taxes. A tariff is a tax. And Mr. Trump is therefore the first Republican in a century whose central economic activity is to hit not just Americans, because it's Americans who pay the tariff. But the whole world is now going to be taxed. I mean, this is reversal on a fantastic scale. And I think these are all signs of a society in trouble. And when a society is in trouble, particularly serious economic trouble, for which there is no easy, quick fix, then they often start looking for scapegoats. And sleazy demagogic politicians are always ready to step into the fray and say, hey, I got the one. Here, let's go hate these people. It'll make you feel a little better even while you're getting screwed.
Is that what Joseph McCarthy did?
Yeah. Here comes a know-nothing, unimportant alcoholic senator from Wisconsin who suddenly becomes a media personality overnight because he has a list. He has a list. And by the way, we shouldn't let it go. We went so far in the hysteria of that time when you really whipped this up. We recently saw that we could put children of immigrant families into cages separated from their parents. That's a level of mean nastiness that even many good American conservatives recoiled from. Well, in the 1950s, we went so far on very shaky evidence to actually execute Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. I was a little kid and I vaguely remember hearing my parents at the dinner table talking about, wow, with all the open-ended questions of guilt, do you really have to kill people? Have we come, and they all wondered and worried in those days, was that the beginning of what would then be, mass executions? Would we go from deporting to executing? Look, you can hear even echoes of that now in this country with people getting kind of overwrought about what is going on here. Look at the theater of Mr. Trump yanking students out of the university whose crime was to be pro-Palestinian around the Gaza issue. America,
People concerned about a plausible genocide.
Yes, but without going into whether you agree with them or not, what is it what are you doing here? What are you doing? One of my colleagues at Columbia wrote to me and he said, well, the Jewish students felt uncomfortable. And I said, you know something? That's too bad. They feel uncomfortable. That has exactly the same purchase on me as having Governor DeSantis in Florida say, as he did, that all of this discussion about the suffering of black people during slavery makes white people uncomfortable. Hello? That's how you fix a social problem if you have a historical record that you need to be ashamed of. You work your way through it. You don't have to, do away with your life or anything like that, but you face it honestly. You talk about how you wished it had never happened. You do something. And yeah, for a little while, it'll make you feel uncomfortable. But is that going to be then we'll never have any owning up to any crisis. It's like, I just read the other day about the massacre of black people in Tulsa, Oklahoma, back in the last century.
Black Wall Street. It's called Black Wall Street.
And you're not going to get over that. That's going to sit there like a very bad burr under the skin, unless and until white people have a few uncomfortable moments dealing with that. Just like when black or brown people do something awful, there'll have to be some uncomfortable moments about dealing with that. Wow. But to shut down another person because you find the political position they articulate uncomfortable to hear, If you don't want to hear it, go out of earshot.
And the university has been a place where, at least since I've been going to the university, I'm sure before me, is a place where this conversation could happen at.
Of course. Here's the irony. There is more dissension and public debate about the whole Israeli-Gaza thing inside Israel than is allowed in this country. Think about that. Think about that. They don't do in Israel. They allow, to their credit, they allow the dissension. Haaretz is a newspaper there. You will find in Haaretz criticisms of Mr. Netanyahu that no paper in this country allows. That is a very strange thing about America, that it functions like that. And believe me, no one should be naive. If you deport people because they're anarchists or Marxists, or you deport people because they're brown or black, look at Mr. Trump. He's deporting people from Central America, and he's bringing in, or at least he has invited, white South Africans to migrate here. I mean, that's not a dog whistle. That's right out plain and clear for everybody to see.
This is Letters and Politics, and we are speaking to Richard Wolff. And today is the 76th birthday of the Pacifica Radio Network and the birth of KPFA in Berkeley, 1949. On this radio station, this historic radio station that has also been a target of the Red Scare, and we'll see what comes in the future. You know, Pacifica Radio, Richard Wolff, was named by Project 2025 as one of its targets, and the guy who wrote the section on the FCC is now chair of the FCC. So good times ahead, sir. Buckle up.
Yes.
When you thought the Cold War was over. Friends, we do like to use this as an opportunity to raise a little bit of money to try to put this radio station on firm ground as we go through this time. We ask for a contribution that you can afford, one that's according to your means, one that you feel good about, knowing that you did your part. For our friends in Los Angeles as well, this is the first day of your spring 2025 fund drive. So we're asking for your support of whatever radio station you're listening to. To KPFA, the phone number is 1-800-439-5732, 1-800-439-5732, and online at kpfa.org. In Southern California, for KPFK in Los Angeles, the number is 818-985-5735, 818-985-5735, and online at kpfk.org. As custom, I'm running a little bit behind with this challenge, but we have an important challenge that came from one of our own KPFA listeners, Susan in Pittsburgh, who is challenging us in the next 15 minutes to raise $1,980. That's a lot of money, but if we can raise 1,980, and I don't know why it's 1,980. Maybe there may be some numerology there. Maybe Susan began listening to KPFA in 1980. I'm just guessing why 1,980, but it's what we have. And if we can raise that collectively right now, if there could be 20 people out there to donate $100, or if there can be 40 people to donate $50, or, you know, it's going to be some combination in between. We could turn this $1,980 into 3,000, what is it, $960? I'm not a mathematician, Mr. Wolff. The phone number, 1-800, for KPFA listeners, 1-800-439-5732, 1-800-439-5732, online at kpfa.org. In Southern California, 818-985-5735, 818-985-5735, and online at kpfk.org. Richard Wolff, you have been on the airwaves of Pacifica Radio for a long time, of KPFK in Los Angeles, KPFA here in the San Francisco Bay Area as well. Even before your show, Economic Update, began to air on KPFA. I remember you were my go-to guest for a long time, especially during the recession, when the recession hit. So it's a pleasure to have you on this day that we celebrate our birthday.
Well, if I could say something, let me add. If the American government were less ideologically driven and a good bit smarter, they would fund Pacifica Radio. And I'll tell you why. Every institution of government, of education, of transportation, of healthcare, every institution needs people within it able and willing to identify flaws and failures, call them out, and bring everybody's attention to them. That's how you fix your institutions. That's how you adjust them to the changes around them. You don't silence the critic. You're grateful. The critic exposes what you need to attend to. And if you silence the critic and there is no criticism, your institutions rot. That's what history teaches us. It is a mistake, beyond the morality of it, is a mistake to shut down critics. They are a very important part of survival, of growth, of adjusting to the world as it changes around you. That's what Pacifica does, and it's very valuable. And much of the country would be better off if the Pacifica approach were part of the conversation. This is not a question about lining up and saluting. It's a question about listening to people who see and experience the world differently from the way you do, because they can learn from you and you can learn from them. That will bring you closer together. You will appreciate each other for what you learn, and you'll hold on to your differences. People always do. You don't have to worry if there's a point of view you don't agree with. Think about it. See if it can teach you something. Then you make something out of it. Shutting it down ought to give you no pleasure at all. What are you doing? It's your fear and your ignorance that are driving you when you do that. No need for it. I'm willing to listen to you, but you've got to be willing to listen to me. That's how we have a decent society. Either of us trying to shut the other one down, that's when we get into really serious trouble. That's been clear to me throughout my time on this earth. It is a terrible, bad thing for a society to do that to its own critical impulses. People who are critical have done something interesting. Let's see what we can learn from them. And if worse comes to worse, and you hear somebody who's critical and you don't think the criticisms have merit, you're free to ignore them. You're free to hold on to what's the problem here? Especially compared with the damage you do when you shut criticism out. That's why I told the story of me in high school. That didn't do me any good, nor the class, nor the teacher, nor the community.
As you know, as a man of knowledge about the ancient world, right, Greece, and as Marx was, right? Didn't Marx get like his PhD in ancient Greece?
Yes.
Socrates was executed.
Yes.
And it wasn't long after that the fall of Athenian democracy came, and that democracy fell for next 2,000 years almost. Folks, we have raised so far $425 towards that $1,980 challenge that came in. Again, the phone number is for KPFA listeners 1-800-439-5732, 1-800-439-5732, and online at kpfa.org. And in Southern California, listening to KPFK in Los Angeles, 818-985-5735, 818-985-5735, and online at kpfk.org. Richard Wolff, again, I mean, we have been so fortunate to have, I think I started talking to you right when the recession began. So I've been talking to you since late 2007, maybe early 2008. I do believe my colleague C.S. Song might have been the first one to have you start coming on our airwaves. But as I always do, I have always ripped off the program against the grain. And so I made you my good friend immediately after that. But I mean, I've always been thankful to having you around us since then to help make sense of, that recession was a crazy time. And I know that was a period of time your life changed too.
Yeah, yeah. I left the University of Massachusetts in part because the freedom of education that I had enjoyed there for many years was coming to an end, given the pressures that that university was under, which were again financial in large part. But to my amazement, by leaving there, which I did in 2008, at the end of that year, of that academic year, I stepped into a world that was radically changing. And I went from being a teacher speaking to 20, 30, 40 students in a classroom to doing what I do now, which is via the internet, millions. It's just an amazing transformation for me as a teacher. I'm doing much the same thing, but I'm reaching through the technology an unbelievable number of people that wonderfully encouraging. And the other thing that's very encouraging is that the audience is eager. It's the dream of every teacher that the students you're trying to reach are in a sense trying to reach you too. That they want to learn, that they came to that room at that hour because they want something from you. They want to hear how something works or how something happened or how things change. And you have some knowledge that you've gathered. There's a beautiful moment for all teachers when you have that coming together. And I'm enjoying that now. I have an audience here in the United States, but also globally, that I never dreamed I would have. I get hundreds of emails every day. It's overwhelming. I don't deny it. It puts me and my wife under very tiring circumstances. On the other hand, I wouldn't trade this for anything. In an honest way, I'm having the time of my life being able to share what I have come to learn about our economic system. And I am a critic. I don't deny it. I'm proud of it. But the criticisms I have, people find them so interesting that they keep encouraging me, which is why I'm here.
And we're lucky to still have you with all that demand. We still have you here with us. And
Well, KPFA, and if I could encourage anyone out there, KPFA was a crucial part of my trajectory coming out of teaching at the university and starting to do this kind of work. Mitch Jeserich, very important to me. I will always be available to this program. I commit myself in advance. It's my way of giving back a little bit to all that Pacifica gives me and gives the audience. This is an absolutely unique network. You have every right to be celebrating. We are all proud of you. I don't know what many of us would do if we didn't have this resource. So it's worth a few bucks. By all means, help this thing. You're doing something for them, but you're also doing something for the whole country. And for a few bucks, that's a lot to get in return.
we are about halfway towards that $1,980 challenge. We've raised $951 right now. We are down to our final 2 minutes, however. Again, the phone number is for KPFA listeners 1-800-439-5732, 1-800-439-5732, and online at kpfa.org for our friends in Southern California listening to KPFK in Los Angeles, 818-985-5735, 5735 and online at kpfk.org. Jim in Ukiah, California. Jim, thank you for your generosity. Jim says KPFA is one of our most treasured resources, and that's from Jim and Ria. So thank you, Jim and Ria. Valerie in San Mateo. Thank you, Valerie. Elizabeth in Las Cruces, New Mexico says, I could not survive out here in New Mexico desert without KPFA. You know, I grew up in a small town in the Bay Area, but in the outskirts of the Bay Area. And KPFA was important to me when I was a kid because I couldn't find kind of that progressive community that we have through the airwaves out my front door where I lived. And there's lots of great things about being from a small town. I like being from a small town originally, but it wasn't a bastion of progressive thought. And KPFA connected me to a larger world. And when you donate to support KPFA, you're doing it for yourself, but you're doing it for others as well, including our friends who right now may not be able to make a contribution. We're now at $1,027. The phone number is 1-800-439-5732. 1-800-439-5732, online at kpfa.org. If there's 15 people out there now who can pledge $50, we'll make it. If there's 30 people who could do $25, you can get it in right now. It'll still count. 1-800-439-5732, 1-800-439-5732, or in Los Angeles, 818-985-5735. Thank you for listening.